Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Aylward, and as always, I'm here with my good friend, colleague, and co-host Jim Gurley. And as always, we had a pretty lively pregame conversation, and what we ended up with topically is this topic of confidence, self-confidence, and just to kind of contextualize how we got there. Jim brought up the concept of elitism, and because we get into politics before we start recording the episode and try to stay away from it when we record, which we do a decent job of. But elitism led to this component of elitism, which is entitlement. And then from entitlement, how does one combat entitlement? I suppose with personal accountability or self accountability, which is kind of connecting us back to our wheel. And then in order to be productive in an environment where you're held to a standard of personal accountability, one is by necessity needs to be confident. Other confident people flourish in cultures of personal responsibility, and I think people without confidence don't. And that could be part of our discussion. But that's the chain of events, and it ties in nicely to our wheel because in the middle of that, all the self confidence fits in nicely. But Jim was reading a book as well, which he can talk a little bit about. But that's the progression of how we got to this topic, which I think is fascinating: self confidence.
Yeah, Mark, this book that I'm reading, but also what's going on in the news, they tie together, but I have more of an appreciation for our initial framework about this framework of these different areas of your life, but in the center is self-awareness. But also next to that, as far as priority of important ways to live your life by, it's managing your self-confidence. Obviously, not having too much or not having enough. And at all stages of your life, confidence is the game. This particular book and not just this book, many other books talk about the importance of huge accomplishments, particularly related to athletics or business and other areas. But there's a lot we can learn from that framework, and the difference between self-confidence and competence, because they don't always go together. You have to do something in order to create the competence, in order to have the self-confidence, then to actually bring that to the world or to compete on that level. So, but to tie back to the elitism, I think I just mentioned that in the beginning because that's it's in the headlines, right? I was talking
Mm-hmm.
about what's going on with Harvard and other Ivy League schools, their funding being taken from them, and then in that conversation, you immediately referred to entitlements, which couldn't be more right on.
Mm-hmm.
I believe there's a changing in the world about maybe they're being revealed, but a lot of resources and a lot of things start at these Ivy League schools. And it's not that we haven't benefited from that. There's clearly, especially when you get into research and medical and things like that. So I'm not at all discounting the importance of having those higher educations, but clearly uh, there is another side to that, and then also this perfectionism, which often talks about this perfectionism. You have to live up to this, and there's no such thing as perfectionism. In fact, we talk about that. It's our tagline, right? The imperfection is the perfection. But I think we've got to this point in this elitism, particularly in academics, that everybody has to be perfect and has to fit into this box, and that's clearly not serving us anymore. Or maybe it did at one point, but it's no longer. So yeah, when we talk about elitism, it is a group of people that clearly feel that they're superior, and maybe they are in some ways, but it doesn't mean that the others aren't important. And I do see a shift going on in the
Well, you know
world.
what's interesting? Yeah, no question. I mean, elitism is, I don't know that that's a word that we even used 10 years
Yeah,
ago,
yeah.
but I think that what's interesting as you're talking is I'm going backwards. What if I started from the word confidence and moved back to elitism? And I think
Mhm.
that what was happening in my brain as you were talking was, well, isn't part of elitism being overconfident, right?
Mm,
So
yeah.
confidence is on a spectrum. How does one get confident? Well, in my life, in my experience, There's a couple ways, and I'm very interested in your opinion on this after I finished this thought, which is you get it maybe from there's some genetic component to it, and then maybe
Mhm.
there's your parents and how they model confidence or how they speak about being confident. Because some parents will tell you that being confident is arrogant, and
Mhm.
others will tell you that's all you want to be is confident because you can conquer the world with that, and without that, you can't do what you need to be able to do. So, but
Mhm.
if your confidence is always being reinforced, isn't
Mhm.
it also likely that at some point you're going to think a lot more about yourself than perhaps you should? And you need a friend to walk in and slap you on the side of the head and say, wait a second, confidence is one thing, but arrogance is another thing altogether. And you're
Mhm.
on the road to entitlement and elitism. That's kind of an
Mhm.
interesting reverse engineering of that concept.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing is it's all relative, right? So let's say I can refer to one group of people, whether it's education, as elitism, but I'm sure some people consider me that as well, just because of where I live or the car I drive or what other things. So I do think it's important to put it in context
Mm-hmm.
that there's different yeah, elitism is based on where you're at. It's a hierarchy of a group of people. Um, Although again, I do think that when you just talk about an Ivy League school, and we've touched on this before. I don't know much about it. You lived in that world, or you understand it because you lived near that. But there's no question in my mind that those people, and maybe justifiably so, don't respect somebody maybe that works with their hands. That this has come up before, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
and remember, I'm a cabinet maker by trade. I worked with my hands. That's how I supported myself. That's how I got to the point I am. And I remember feeling that especially the homes that we were working in. These were Piedmont. So this is multi-million dollar homes, probably $10 million or more now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these people absolutely treated you like you were less than that. That
Mm-hmm.
that to me is a form of elitism, and so it doesn't just have to be about education, but they hold themselves very in a high confidence because maybe it's the reinforcement with their degrees and all these different things. And I'd like to think that we're evolving, and you're not smart just because of the degrees on your wall. I find in some cases that the most educated people are, in some ways, the the most ignorant about other things, about how things work, particularly when it comes to construction, because it's a homeowner, and they say they're, I don't know, a physician or something. They don't really value what it takes to do something, so they look down at everybody, or they don't value that. So again, obviously, I have a bit chip on my shoulder because I've been around it. On the
Mm-hmm.
other hand, I'm at a stage in my life too where I have a lot more self awareness of it as well. So
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's. You mentioned that I grew up around it, and to clarify, I grew up in Boston, and
thank you for clarifying.
probably
Yeah, yeah.
about 5 miles from the Harvard campus, and MIT and BU and BC, and I mean,
Mhm.
there's the number of high level educational institutions within a stone's throw of my home. To the extent, Jim, I don't know if I ever told you this, when I was filing applications for schools, everyone was like, go to Harvard, go to Dartmouth, go to Princeton, go to Yale. I'm like, no, I'm getting the fuck out of here. I'm not going to an Ivy League school because all I've heard about my whole life is how wonderful they are. And I've not seen any evidence that that's true.
Yeah,
What they're producing is not what I aspire to be. Let me put it
yeah,
that way. But
yeah.
I also think the family piece of this is huge,
Oh yeah,
right? It's like
absolutely.
if your dad's confident and your mom's confident
Mhm.
and your dad and mom treat each other well,
Mhm.
there's a pretty high chance you're going to have an easy time with your own confidence. It's not
Mhm.
guaranteed, but I think that's a major building block. By the time you get to an institution of academics, I think
Mhm.
you're on you got what you got, and you can reinforce it and build upon it. But I think it starts at a very, very young age.
Yeah, I agree. So let's shift that to sports because again, we could talk about academics. There's no question if you're in that environment and everybody's telling you how wonderful you are because you're acing tests and you have this amazing support system, you're going to grow up with more confidence than somebody that didn't have that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
maybe is a form of elitism. It's also why I like sports because you can apply some of those same disciplines to sports that transfer into business and other parts of your life, but because you played sports, it's all about, to win championships, you have to have some self-confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And once that's weakened, then that's the difference between winning and losing. And in fact, this book that I started to read was talking about some figures, sports figures that we all know, Eli Manning, and he how he was able to get his Super Bowl win, but the year before, he had these blocks, these and there's a process. I think we all um, are going through it but not aware of it, and it was, and I'll walk through each one of them, but it's so much related to what we talk about every week, and even starting off with the mind, body, spirit, the importance and what we know about sports psychology and high performance, of how the body and the mind are related. And that starts
Mm-hmm.
with proper breathing, meditation. It's all about getting in that zone. So that's the number one pillar when it comes um, to performance, is getting your body right with your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, what's your thoughts on that part? And then I'll go through the other three, but
Yeah,
I'd
well,
let you
I mean,
appreciate that
on
one.
a funny aside note, when you're talking about Eli Manning had these blocks, I'm like, yeah, he had one in particular block. They were called the New England Patriots, and then he beat them.
Yeah, that was the one. I think yeah. And it's, yeah, you could use that because Tom Brady, will go down as the greatest quarterback ever without question. And there's a great example of somebody that had confidence, but also managed it very well, right?
Yeah,
And
well,
that,
he was a mind body guy all day long.
yeah.
He might have been one of the pioneers in that space, at least in the NFL. But
Oh,
no,
interesting. Yeah, he was ahead
I
of
think
his
we,
time when it came to that, wasn't he?
I
Yeah,
think so. Yeah, I think so. I
yeah,
mean, and people are replicating some of the techniques and conditioning stuff and nutrition stuff but yeah, I mean, there's no question in my mind, and this goes back to our wheel, right? Everything's connected. Everything
hmm,
of importance is connected, I should say. And so
yeah,
if you're mentally and physically well, even perhaps better than well at operating at a high level of performance, you would almost have to try not to perform at a high level in money, relationships, career, worldview. I mean, you've had these moments, I'm sure, Jim, where you
yeah,
felt a supreme level of confidence in a particular moment,
hmm,
and sometimes it doesn't last. It doesn't often last, but sometimes it lasts for a little, maybe the whole game it lasts. And
hmm,
then during the game, if you will, I've always been fascinated by this notion of momentum, which is
hmm,
one person does something to make him confident, and then you see that virus just infecting the whole team.
yeah,
And one score, just the guys that are behind, all of a sudden they're way ahead and the game is over. And that
yeah,
was just in the blink of an eye, confidence became a virus and infected the whole team. I love
yeah.
watching that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the mindset
Yep.
that comes with the mentality that is the difference between winning or losing a championship, right? You have
Hmm.
to have a certain mindset that starts obviously with leaders and certain players, and then before you know it, you have this level of confidence you can beat anybody, and then
Well,
that plays itself out.
here's another interesting approach to that, and I always think of Mike Tyson when I think of this, and that is, what about ignorance? Is ignorance a form of confidence? Like you don't know any better? Like I'm going to go into the ring with this guy, and everyone else that would consider stepping into the ring with this guy would think they were insane because he's going to kill you, but I know I can beat him because I
Mhm.
don't know any better, right? So
Yeah, well, absolutely. In fact, this the author of this book talks about how the human mind can develop a what they call a mental bank account, and
mhm,
it knows when to make withdrawals and deposits.
mhm,
And that's really, again, back to the framework. We talk about that Frank last week, but the framework is, this is going on whether you're self-aware or not,
mhm,
and you put yourself in positions to make deposits and then withdrawals. So it's not just self-confidence, it's competence. And that competence is the practice, right? The reps,
mhm,
all of those things. What's interesting is once you move on to step one is, again, mindset, the mental bank, the mental bank account that you're making deposits and withdrawals from. The second one is this, which is, I found fascinating, was this perfection versus imperfection. That nobody's perfect. and
Hmm.
the highest performers um, don't go too low. When they make a mistake, they have the ability to manage their account, so they're not going too high or too low.
Hmm.
And makes
Hmm.
complete sense, right? Let's go back to the football analogy. One thing about Tom Brady, this is how he could win in the final seconds, because he could throw an interception and then walk back on the field like that and pretend like it never happened.
Forget about it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
No,
that
there's definitely something to be said for that,
oh yes.
living in the present moment and managing that, failure becomes a learning experience as opposed to a failure. I think when you become confident, you
Mhm.
recognize failure as opportunity as opposed to a challenge. At least that's been my
Yeah.
experience.
And so with obsession with perfection also goes back to kind of this elitism conversation we had earlier. This comes from our universities where everybody has to get an A, everybody gets 100%. They've created these standards that we know are not serving us as well as they once did, because they don't apply to the real world. And it turns out that if you're striving for perfection and you don't achieve that, then you'll go into what is called a self-destructive mode.
Mm-hmm.
So the mind will then start to self-criticize, so that it's back to the selves, right? You'll go into self-confidence if it doesn't go the way you think it should, because you were told you should only get an A, and if you don't, you're a loser.
Mm-hmm.
Then the mind will immediately go into this very negative self-destruction mode, and then leads to ongoing self-criticism. Then it can't get itself out. So, and I think we've all done that, right? That's what's so relative to what this discussion is. uh, I had some wins last week, right? They took a number of years and a lot of failures.
Mm-hmm.
um, but I could just see my self-confidence going up, in other things that I do.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
and it feels good, but it's I've been through these things before. Just like I said, part of it's just relief. The other part is, yeah, it does pay off not to quit, and that's the other one that they go into. Most people quit. They
Most
don't
people do.
they don't
Yeah.
have the patience to stay with it. Um,
Well, I
and,
think the other thing that strikes me, Jim, is that when you reach this point of confidence, whatever it might be, sports, business, your own thing, your family, your it doesn't matter. You reach a particular point and you feel that supreme kind of graceful confidence. It's difficult to describe. It's a really positive emotion, but I think you have two choices, at least from my perspective, when you get there. That I deserve this, or thank you very much, God. I'm grateful for this
Mhm.
opportunity. And I think if you pick I deserve this, you're on your way to entitlement and elitism. And if you pick thank you and gratitude,
Oh yeah, I like
then
that.
I think that you can replicate that with ease.
Mm. And appreciation for others and circumstances,
All of
and
it.
that, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's a landslide. Gratitude creates a landslide.
so, yeah. So number three is the narrative, right? The personal narrative. And it turns out that the human mind, it's a nervous system, obviously, that this adrenaline that's produced is a chemical. And that chemical is a performance enhancing drug. It can be. It also
Mm-hmm.
can be disabling. It could be that adrenaline of fear could cause you to just completely lock up and go
Mm-hmm.
into protective mode. But it turns out that chemical actually is what is pushing us to be our best self. So you seek it in a way that you want it, knowing that that's a sign that you're making progress. And so
Yeah, well,
instead of
that's
being
yeah.
sick to your stomach and um, scared and all that you almost start to like that feeling, and you're seeking that out because that means progress. So that was
Yeah,
really,
it's
yeah, break that down. Just
well,
adrenaline, the chemical of adrenaline, what it does to us. Yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure it's a version of dopamine high, and it's this kind of semi-artificial thing. What I was thinking about was my daughter's experience with anxiety and going to the first therapist years ago that she really liked, and this guy was saying similar to what you just said. When you have a fear, And in this particular case, it was anxiety,
Hmm.
specifically flying, getting on a plane. Like it freaked her out. This
Interesting.
guy flipped the whole thing around and said, don't push the fear away.
Yeah.
Stare right at the fear, embrace the fear, take it on. And by doing that, instead of running away from it, you will dissipate, the fear will dissipate over time.
Hmm.
But if you avoid it and pretend it's not there and try and move away from it, what you're doing is feeding it. And
Yeah.
as counterintuitive as that sounds, once I heard that from my daughter and it seemed to be helpful, I started hearing it from other people as well. How do you handle fear? You can't
Mhm.
just throw confidence at stuff. Well, I suppose you can. But if you face fear, then that confidence can come back around the corner on you. It's a very, very interesting psychological phenomenon.
Yeah, this is exactly what the takeaway was. This in this particular um, section was you reframe it as good, not bad, and
Hmm.
and that adrenaline becomes like your rocket fuel. It becomes the performance enhancing drug, the chemical that
Yep.
takes it. But like you said, just getting comfortable with being nervous. What it was back to we're doing the football thing, might as well. But Bill Belichick said, even with all his Super Bowl wins and everything, he gets nervous before every game still.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I
And so I
remember.
think, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I remember 12 years old, Little League All-Star game. And I was, as my grandmother used to say, I was the bee's knees. I thought pretty highly of myself back then. And we won everything. We were winning everything. But I
Yeah,
remember this was going to another town
yeah,
to play guys. The first time I saw a curveball. But anyway, I was just so nervous.
yeah,
And I was like the MVP confident guy. I
yeah.
this was unfamiliar to me. And my
Mhm.
dad was the coach. And I was behind the concessions. Remember the concession stands at Little League games? I
Oh
was
yeah.
behind the concession stand with a couple other guys, and we were just peeing. And no pee was coming out. We were just felt like we had to pee because we were so scared and so nervous. And I remember going to my dad and I said, Dad, I am so nervous. And he said something to me like, Mark, if you weren't nervous, I would either consider you a liar or an idiot. Okay.
Mhm.
And it's so true. It's just
Interesting.
so
Well, you
true.
were lucky that he was there to answer that question for you, or give you that, because I don't remember that conversation. I had to learn that myself, and I still get super. I did that talk in Las Vegas a few months ago. I couldn't believe how nervous I was. Right.
It didn't get rid of nervousness in my life. It just and
Yeah.
it enabled me to step on the
Yeah.
field in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
I still
and
get nervous. I'm human.
yeah. 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 So part of it, he talked about that. Why do high school students do really, really well in high school, but then they can't perform in college, right? What is the
Hmm.
difference? And even there's a military too. How do you, prepare for that military? He talks a lot about the enemy's uh, decision. So it's not just you; it's understanding your competition and how that. So but the next one is these mental filters, right? And it's I like this because it really focuses on something I talk about all the time. 90% of life is just showing up.
Hmm.
And it's true. It's hard to show up, especially hard to show up when you don't have any money, when it's cold, when it's hard. Showing up is hard. And to show up all the time, prepared with a good attitude is even harder. So he really focuses on the mental filters that are going through our mind, typically the filter of failure. So your mind's going to go, oh, I'm going to fail. So it gets scared,
Hmm.
versus focusing on your successes. Even if you only had one success and say 10 failures, you can train your mind to focus on the success to have a positive outcome. But that's a super important part when you're when you're are nervous or your adrenaline's pumping to focus on your successes. So you're not.
One of the things that's helped me, and I'm not always successful doing it, but I try to do it when I need to do it, and that is this notion of the worst case scenario.
Mhm.
I don't know if he wrote about this at all or you've gotten to that yet, but it's like, well, what's the worst thing that could happen if I step onto this little league field now and I'm nervous and everyone's watching and I make a fool of myself and I lose? Like, is that the worst thing that could happen? Like, what is that? So what? Who gives a shit? Right.
Yeah.
Which leads me to one of the more important things in my life regarding confidence or the ability to be productive or consistent, which is try not to concern yourself with what other people think about who you are and what you're doing. And
Mhm.
I think that when I've been able to manage that, I've been able to manage my confidence and use that into my advantage in some level of productivity or accomplishment. But I also fall victim to that all the time, which is like someone would say something or online or a stranger in another setting, and I'd be like, I would take serious offense to it, and it would trigger some anger, and then now my mind goes, well, wait a second, who is this person? You don't even know this person. Who gives a shit? So the ability to either ignore or not pay too much attention to the criticism of others, I think, is a major factor for me in my confidence.
Yeah, no question, which is the mental filters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then persistency and patience. You have to be persistent and the patience to let things come to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that this one licensing deal I just did last week, where yeah, a long story. I won't go into all the particulars, but this is, decades of iterations and failures, and then it's kind of funny the timeliness of this, right? Because I licensed it to a company, and then they got purchased by the Chinese, and then the Chinese tried stealing my patent, and then I had to hire another lawyer. It took like 5 years and a lot of money. Got it back, and then we were going to do another deal, and then the whole thing blows up. Well, it turns out that they were Chinese, so certainly, and then when we placed the order, it was with a factory in Vietnam, and it kind of speaks right for itself, right? That was the same week that the tariffs were removed from Vietnam and then increased with China. So now my
Well,
so
you know what's the funniest part about that is, you've done so much good work in that space to get where you are right now, but look at all the things that were going on that you had no fucking idea
oh
that
my
that you had
God.
that you had no control over, maybe even awareness of in a particular moment.
I know. And you talk about a hit to your self-confidence.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I have to say, if anything, it's not just relief. It's that, yeah, like let's go back to your point, Mark. Maybe it was gratitude and appreciation for when we did a podcast on this, right? It's not it's a morfate. It was about talking about things happen for you, not to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I am talking like a 5 year period. I'm not talking 5 weeks or 5 months.
Mm-hmm.
This is over a 5 year period where the worst, where it was a done deal. COVID hits, it falls apart. Then it just I mean, it's like the worst.
Well, it's nice to have somebody around to remind you of these things. I was talking to one of my kids 2 days ago, and she's
Mhm.
experienced a particular level of success, and we were talking about
Mhm.
where she is in her career right now, and it's magnificent. But she was losing. She wasn't listening while we were talking. She wasn't paying attention to the fact that she's 31 years old now, and she started investigating health and nutrition when she was 10, right?
Oh,
So
interesting.
21
Wow.
years to
Yeah.
get where she is right now.
Mhm.
And you can't discount any one of those years,
No.
any one of those weeks, any one of those months. It literally took 21 years for her to get where she is right
Yeah, and
now.
that speaks to the persistency and the patience, right?
Patience,
The
but
persistency to stay with something that she was obviously uh, passionate about, but also didn't give up. And I'm
well,
sure
you know what
I
else
know you told me times there. I think didn't she get sued one time or?
Oh yeah, yeah. The other funny part, Jim, you'll appreciate this, and it's very personal, but I'll share it anyway. And that is, she said to me, because she was on stage and on a couple of podcasts,
Yeah,
really some big people. I mean,
yeah,
global reach. And she said, I was talking about you, Dad. And I
that's
like, well,
cool.
what do you mean you were talking about me? She's like, well, every single time I was ready to give up, you wouldn't let me.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah.
like, oh, honey, that's so
Well,
kind for you
I
to say
remember this a few years ago when you told me the story, but and this is, I love this quote, right? That we kill our leaders, be worth being killed. So
that.
she was a leader in her industry about maybe questioning, some of the food or what was going on. And then you say she received a letter from the county or the state.
There was a state law in Florida that you couldn't talk to people one-on-one, face-to-face about nutrition if you didn't have a license, if you weren't a medical licensed individual. And there was a sting. They set her up by talking to her on the phone and then getting her to come meet at a coffee shop under the guise of being a potential prospect. And as soon as they asked her what her name was and she gave them her name, they whipped out this subpoena. It was an $800 fine and a cease and desist order. And gosh, that was years ago now. But I mean, it took me a whole day to talk her off the ledge. She thought she was out
I
of
love the
business.
story because one, look how far she has come, but look how far that was an example of the medical industry trying to suppress any competition. Talk about elitism, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And a government agency, maybe with good intentions at one point to protect the public from whack jobs, but that wasn't the case here. And she persisted on, and then so it's great to hear that she just did a talk and
Yeah,
is being
no.
recognized. I think it's just a great example of competence, self-confidence, and then persistency to stay with that. So, and
Yeah, and
she's
it's
lucky to
great.
have you. Yeah.
It's a great thank you. It's a great connection back to elitism as we get towards the end of our episode today,
Yep.
because that's exactly what's happened in the food and drug
Mm-hmm.
world is the people that are in power
Mm-hmm.
believe they know better than we do.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got us all on symptomatic solutions
Mm-hmm.
instead of root causes, because root causes get rid of things and
Mm-hmm.
symptomatic treatments generate revenue forever. And
Yeah.
that is absolutely at the core of elitism, and we're exploding it right now. And I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what a great to wrap it up or to tie it back to elitism. So it's a great story, and yeah, glad we got that one out. It was a hard connection between elitism and self confidence, but I think we did a good job thanks
Well,
to that
thank God
story. So,
everything's connected to everything else. Otherwise, we'd be fucked.
isn't that the
So
truth?
there
Yeah.
you go. Thanks,
And
Jim.
yeah, all right, Mark. Until next week.
Yeah, see you, man.